Welcome to Basement Tales with Sam Jackman, Charlie Einsman, Ed Grass, and Sandra Delancey. We have fun telling crazy but true stories about turning the worst possible property disasters into bags of money. Along the way, we'll pass along some important lessons to help you make cash on real estate. Sam and Charlie walked away from cubicle hell 25 years ago. Starting with no property, they created their own Clear Sky group of companies, sold hundreds of houses, bought dozens of rentals, and made millions in hard money loans. I'm Ed, a big firm litigator until muscular dystrophy made me find a hobby other than suing people. I miss it. Sandra's the normal person here with a real job plus some rentals. Her decades of friendship with the group, from office flunkies to property gurus, might help keep us all humble and focused on learning something. I wouldn't count on it.
My topic of the day is the newly made up middle class abyss that this country is about ready to create.
What the? This is not a political podcast.
No, it's not a political podcast. It's an actual truth. It's reality, and it's the reality that
Let's assume it's a reality. How can we help with property? Because
that's a great question, because we have two cases this week.
But we'll only go through this topic if Sandra is willing to participate 130%, because when I go into my stories of the week, man, it's not.
And what, the middle class abyss? I don't know if I can do something
so
about that.
Okay, so let's just.
But wait, I want to hear what it is. You have to ground me first. So I'm a background person. I need details before I can fully get into something. So you need to tell me what it is.
So I'll start with one.
Okay.
We have a property that became vacant in the normal course and was getting turned over, and we got a request from a person that we know. It's Charlie, a close friend of Charlie's. They're working with someone who has a good job and no place to live. They're living in their car. And we'll go from there.
Okay.
Yeah. So this.
Okay, so wait a second. You have a vacant property from person A.
Yeah, cleaned up yet. It's just the cleanup.
Person B needs a place
person
to live.
Person B, who's a nice person, who's currently homeless and has a good job.
Okay. We're not solving this yet, right? We're going to get some more background. There's some more to
There's more background?
I'm wondering. You have a vacant place. You have a person sleeping in there.
Okay, the vacant place was that we had a rental, a guy there for maybe 7 years. He was a fine tenant. He left it in normal deteriorated condition.
Okay.
In a week to turn it over. So that's the background on the place itself. Just a normal townhouse. It rents for about $2,000 a month.
Well, what do you want me to tell you? To put the guy in the house? Okay.
No. Hold on.
All right. That's what I'm saying. There must be more to this story.
Well, let's just stay with the times, and then we'll get to the bottom of what I'm calling this middle class divide, middle class abyss that we're creating right now.
Okay.
And this is the dividing of the middle class, and the lower middle class is falling over the edge into the abyss. Okay. So because of this environment, the COVID environment, nobody is moving out. Nobody is changing housing, because either people that aren't paying their rent aren't getting evicted. People who aren't paying their mortgages aren't getting foreclosed because of the forbearances. So what's going on in COVID is that everybody is staying put. Nobody's moving.
Right.
Okay. We haven't had a vacancy. We haven't had a vacancy in our current rentals all year. We brought on a few new rentals into our portfolio. And not only have we gotten crazy higher rents, but we've had 5 or 6 applications per property. Okay. 2 weeks ago, I got a frantic call, frantic email, frantic text, because like we are, when you got to find somebody, you triangulate their butt. And so I got triangulated by a good friend of mine that I've known for, I was in their wedding. Husband's retired sheriff. She is a social worker in the school system. She reaches out to me and she goes, "Hey, one of my kids has been homeless for 3 months. The mom's been living out of her car. Do you have any vacancies?" I said to her, "Yeah, I've got 2. I've got one that we're bringing online that we just purchased. And then I've got another townhouse would probably be better for her." Because I knew where the boy was going to high school, and this property was closer to the high school. I said, yeah, I mean, I've got one. I mean, we've got guys in there doing work. When does she need the place by? And she goes, well, she needs the place now because she's been living in her car for the last 2 or 3 months. And I'll get into why she's living in her car here in a second. And so I didn't think nothing of it. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm just thinking, oh my God, this is not for Clear Sky Properties, man. This is for my other charity, Catholics for Housing. She needs a homeless shelter, right? She needs transitional housing, something to,
yeah.
She can be in housing. I said, no, I'm not really qualified for this. But let me look into it. I certainly don't want to have anybody out there homeless. And so of course, I'm looking in there. I get to know the person that referred me to her is a stand-up person. I'm like, okay, well, we can certainly move her in and have her short-term problem fixed. But from a long-term standpoint, we can't help you because I don't want a long-term problem, because especially not in COVID, we can't evict anybody. And so then what happened was I said, okay, I heard some rumors. She told me some things. She was supposed to, I said, okay, she can move in. Just give us first month's security deposit, first month's rent. I said, if it's a long-term problem, I said, we'll deal with it. I said, in COVID, I don't want to deal with it because it's COVID. And so push comes to shove. The day she was supposed to move in, and this is where the story gets beyond worse than you can imagine. The day when she was supposed to move in, I was supposed to meet her to collect the money. I had already gotten $800 from the school, right? Because this person who's a social worker had already gotten an $800 donation from the school itself. So I got $800 already written out to us before I even said yes. She had the check over to me before I even said yes. And so as it turned out, it was like $3,700 minus $800 or something. So she was supposed to give us an additional $2,900. Well, and of course the person said, yeah, I got the money, I can give it to you. So what happened was the day she was supposed to move in, which this is very recent, this is like a week ago, she goes, I don't have the money because I got garnished. And she goes, my check got garnished. And so I was like, hold on a second. That doesn't make any sense. You are not moving in, right? Because I was already a little bit worried that this is going to be a long-term problem. And that one of the things that we do with certain people, with people in general, is that they've got to tell us the truth. I've got to know the truth. And so in this case, when I was told, remember, I haven't talked to the person yet. I was just meeting her through it. At this point, I hadn't called her directly yet. And so when I heard that her paycheck got garnished, I knew that wasn't the truth. So I was then like, okay, either I'm hearing the truth secondhand, or this person that's going to move in isn't telling us the truth. I said, one of the things is going on here. So I said, okay, because when you get garnished on your paycheck for, let's say, a debt, let's say you're making out $2,500 a paycheck, they're only going to garnish you like $300 or $400 a month. They're not going to take your entire paycheck. So I said, oh, that's not true. Something's not being, told to me correctly. So then I'm like, all right, I think I'm hearing the secondhand information. I think the person that's relaying it on to me doesn't understand what's going on. I said, I've got to meet this person in person. And so that was around the time we had that big snowstorm. And so I met her. I had the social worker who brought her to our attention show up and meet us too, because I needed to get to the whole story straight. And so what ended up happening was that her bank account got garnished because of a debt. It wasn't her check. Her bank account got garnished. So if you guys know garnishments, that means they take whatever they're owed, as long as it's in the account, and they'll zero out your account. Well, sure enough, the account got zeroed out. So her paycheck didn't get garnished. Well, so I met the person face to face with the social worker, and I let it be known that not only do we need to be told the truth 100%, but I understood why the truth wasn't being relayed correctly. And so I had to apologize because I misinterpreted, because it was whoever said that she got garnished didn't tell me her bank account got garnished. But then Sam got involved, and I was agreeing with Sam in that we didn't want to have anybody in our house where it was a long-term problem. This comes to my middle-class abyss that we are creating as a country. So I met her. She brought pay stubs. She had already filled out an application. I took a look at the application. She brought her pay stubs, and she's gainfully employed for the last year and a half. She had been employed before that for 10 years well, I'll get into it. I don't have to mention her name. She was employed for 10 years as an assistant manager at Walmart. They loved her. She was making $60,000 a year. Harris Teeter hired her almost 2 years ago, making $80,000 a year. This lady has 4 kids. Three of them are in college right now. She's putting 3 kids through college. The other kid, the reason why I was there is because the other kid was in high school at a local high school. And so this person's making $80,000 a year at Harris Teeter in our area. And I called her supervisor, and her supervisor was so worried that he didn't know her situation. She's been living in a car for the last 2.5 months. And there's another part of that story why she was living in her car. And then the next question is, well, where are the kids? Well, 3 of the kids are at college. They're in their dorms staying on college. And the high school kid is down in Virginia Beach living with his sibling, taking online classes in Prince William County schools. And so the kids have been okay for the last 3 months. And this poor lady's been living out of her house, making $80,000 a year. Now, of course, her credit's not great. Okay, let's get that straight. Her credit's not good, but she's making $80,000 a year. And so I called her supervisor at the Harris Teeter, and let me tell you something. He loved her like a daughter, and he was like, "There is no way I'm going to lose her as an employee," because I was worried that she was going to move back home, and home was back down south in New Orleans. And this person grew up in New Orleans, and she did not want to go back there, but that was her only choice, was either live in a car or she's going back to New Orleans, because her credit was so bad and that the inventory wasn't there for her to even qualify for a rental. And she voluntarily moved out of the rental that she was in a couple months ago because the owner was selling it. So I said to her, well, why did you move out of the rental without having another place to move into? And she goes, well, I did.
That part of the story didn't make sense to me.
Right. But she goes, I did. She goes, I answered an ad on Craigslist, and I gave the homeowner $3,600 because this rent was $1,800. I gave him $3,600 a month, and we agreed, and I signed a lease, and I was going to move in that day. Well, she moved out of her place to move into this place. Well, guess what? The Craigslist ad that she answered was a scam.
Oh.
And so this happened, I don't know, 2.5, 3 months ago. And so the call was brought to my attention. I'm like, oh my God, this isn't, Catholics for Housing or CFH, man. We're not a charity. But when I met this lady, and I met her with my friend who is a social worker, I'm like, all right. It was probably this was the worst meeting of the week, and I'm about ready to get into the second worst meeting of the week. But it all is around the fact that her credit wasn't good. So when she applied to other rentals, she told me, she goes, Mr. Charlie, she goes, I've spent $2,500 other than the $3,600 that I got ripped off in application fees, trying to apply for rentals because nobody will accept me because of her credit. And so I'm like, oh my God, okay, you're fine. And she's making $80,000 a year at Harris Teeter. And let me tell you something, she's putting 3 kids through college. And her high school kid who's going to Prince William County School, which is in DC area for you guys who aren't listening, is down in Virginia Beach, 3.5 hours away, blackboarding his way into high school in this area because this is where she wants to be, because this is where she's working. $80,000 a year. Now, that person has been living in her car for 3 months. And so these are the type of people that are falling into this middle class divide that's opening up in our eyes. And so I said to her, I just said to her, hell with her. I mean, the social worker was so nice. And I'm like, I need to have the first month's rent and security deposit so that this short-term problem can be fixed. You can have a place to stay and enjoy your kids and enjoy the holiday. But at least for us as a business, I at least got to deposit the first month's rent and security deposit. So she's good until February, or roughly February the 1st. And so now what I'm going to start doing with her is I'm going to start helping her with some financial literacy courses, because she is making 80 grand a year. And so I want to make sure we get her expenses up to par, give her an income statement so we can see what's coming in and what's going out. But this, like I said, this lady has 3 kids in college that she should put through college. And I think she's trying to overextend herself by helping these kids out. But we're going to put her through some sort of financial literacy program so that we can help her out, because we are better than this. And so, I'm still at a loss for words, and this is still a really bad, this is a bad situation, but at least for her, we're going to go ahead and make her holidays at least happy, and she can be safe for a minute. And we're going to go ahead and help her and make this a long-term rental. And hopefully
she's in there now.
10 years. Yeah.
Yeah. And will she keep getting garnishments, or is she?
No. So what happened was, I guess there was a creditor out there that just garnished her bank account for not hitting her Harris Teeter pay. And so the garnishment's been paid off. The creditor's been paid off. And so she's going to be on okay footing here on out. And so her next payment due to us is like $800 January 1, and that will get her up through February 1. So with an $80,000 a year salary, I told her, I said, look, we're going to go ahead and try and help you. And we're going to do more than that. We're going to help you in the long term. And so I guess this is kind of my, unfortunately or fortunately, this is sort of my pet project that I'm going to go ahead and start working on in the new year.
Well, two things I know come out of this. You see this a lot, that people assume that somebody's in financial trouble, doesn't want to work, or isn't very good at things. Here you have somebody who's obviously a good employee, making a serious income because they're obviously talented and all of that, and then they find themselves in some financial problem, and the whole COVID thing is messing with the housing supply. So like you said, if you get, for whatever reason, she kind of got stuck between properties, and if you have a ding anywhere, your credit card or whatever else, landlords can be very, very picky. I guess the other thing to point out about this is helping people in this situation. Maybe that her situation can get normalized and she can be a renter for you guys, and you end up having, a good relationship and know the people. And it's so much beyond credit rating. I had one of the first rentals I had, the very nice woman had lost her house. She bought high through no fault of her own, lost her townhouse during the 2008 crash, and her credit was destroyed. And I met her and got to know her, and I rented a place to her, and she's still there. Right? She pays every month. She's a really nice lady. And so there's some opportunities for landlords if you put in a little bit of this extra work. The worst thing that could happen in Charlie's story is maybe he can help her get into a charitable situation or some help, or get her on her feet. Maybe she rents somewhere else, and you've done some good. But you also, from a purely business standpoint, you may end up with a great tenant.
Oh, I expect we'll have the best of tenants. I expect.
I think so. Well, I mean, she's in our house today, so there ain't no, this is a relationship that started from someone's car, from car to house, and so we're gonna go ahead and get her hopefully fixed up. I mean, she's got 80,000 reasons why there's no reason why we can't help her get on the road to financial solvency, at least getting her personal life straightened out. And like I said, she's got a great work history. She's got a really good track record. And so she's the kind of person, like I said, she's putting 3 kids through college. She's got one in high school, basketball player that might end up getting a scholarship. But this is the type of person that, everybody else would turn their thumb at, or, shun their nose at her. But I just thought that let's go ahead and take a chance and see where she is. I mean, even in the COVID world, number one, the source of income is good, right? She's been at Harris Teeter for a year and a half, assistant manager. They're not firing her. Number two, she's got really good income. I mean, her credit's not so good. So, I mean, in this case, at least from a risk standpoint, not only being a good/bad story, from a risk standpoint, maybe this won't be a long-term problem. But I tell you, I would say right now, maybe it's 50-50, but at least that's the chance in this case that we're willing to take. And And if this person didn't know that we owned quite a few properties, to just call me up and say, hey, oh, by the way, do you have any vacancies? And oh, by the way, that happens to me all the time. And the fact that we did have a vacancy, this lady would probably still be living in her car today.
I don't know. This makes me think of a few different things. I mean, I hear a lot in this story, Charlie. And you know, personally, I've been trying to rent my place over in Southeast, and I've gotten a lot of interest with a lot of stories. And I'm trying to, it sounds crazy, but I'm trying to keep my heart out of it because I've met a few people with stories. And I would rent, this place to all of them, if I could. I mean, there's the mother with, the 5 children who's sleeping in her father's living room. There's all kinds of stories out there. And I think back to my childhood. My mother had, 7 children, and we had to find, she had to find a place for 7 children. I mean, no one wants to rent to that person. So, I mean, there are a lot of stories out there. I don't know what are, like, I know we're not obliged to do anything for anyone, but, when your investment goals kind of, hit that point where you kind of start feeling like you have to do something charitable, when does that happen? Am I still in this to make money, or am I in this to, help people? And I kind of want to, do both. So as we've been, doing this podcast, I'm starting to think about, what can we do to help people? What can we do with some affordable housing? Because in DC, even in the place that I'm looking to rent, I mean, the rent is crazy. A regular person, even the person that I'm considering renting it to, and you guys would probably say don't do it. And I think I got a don't do it from your office to say don't do it, but I'm going to rent to them anyway because it's pulling on my, kind of heartstrings. So I'm going to do it. But $2,000, is a lot of money for someone that's making, below, $70,000 a year. So I don't know. What to
say. Just to add on to your point, remember what I said, right? You say there's a lot of stories, and I agree, man. There's a lot of stories, and there's a lot of liars out there. And so the thing that I had to do, and I'd be kicking myself to this day if I didn't do it. I had to show up, and I had to meet this person in person, because I need to find out if they were lying or not. Because when I heard this, bullshit garnishment story, and she was supposed to move in that day. I ixnated, man. I was so mad. And Angel will tell you, I was so mad that I had been lied to. And Sam will tell you, I don't ever get mad unless people lie to my face. And I just can't take it, man. I just erupt. So when I heard the garnishment story, I was like, who the heck, who are you kidding? You're not going to get your entire paycheck garnished, because somebody like me who knows, I've had my paycheck garnished. When I went through video stores and that debacle, I had some creditors after me before I had to actually file. I had my paycheck garnished because I owed some creditors some money. So I know what all this means. And so when I heard that her paycheck had supposedly gotten garnished and that she couldn't pay us any money, I didn't believe that story. So I had thought that I had gotten lied to, but I knew her story. And I'm like, oh my gosh, even though I'm so upset that someone lied to me, I at least owe this person to meet them in person, because I need to ferret out the lie if that's what it was. And in her case, that was so far from the truth. She was being 100% honest. And so then once I determined that she was 100% honest, I'm like, oh my gosh, she has probably the highest character of anybody that I had ever met. And I was there for 2 hours, and Angel will tell you, because she goes, where have you been all this time? Because, Angel's like, you need to wear a mask in the house. You need to do that. You need to do that. You're getting so close with people, during COVID, blah, blah, blah. And I don't want to hear any of that stuff. So she'll tell you, I was there for 2 hours talking to this person because I had to understand and get to the bottom of the story. And this was so far from the truth that she did not lie. She was being so above board, it wasn't even funny. And so that's sort of how I dealt with that situation. And so now, like you guys said, maybe we have a tenant for the next 5 or 10 years. I don't know how the story is going to end, but at least that's where that story ends, at least as of now.
For you, it was it's too bad to believe scenario.
There's some really bad stuff that's going on out there with landlords and tenants, including this person that I'm going to rent to,
Yeah.
I'm like, what is the stuff that's showing up in your credit, history with the landlord? I mean, I wasn't expecting to see landlord issues on a report, and it was landlord issues.
Yeah.
and the landlord's been coming after them. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, really? I knew
Well,
it would be
tell
bad,
us
but I didn't know how
tell us your
bad.
story, Sandra. What happened with your tenant?
Uh, well, the person is kind of close to me, so the
Well,
the story.
just keep it generic enough that we don't want to identify anybody,
The
but
generic part about it is that, in Maryland, supposedly this person is saying in Maryland that the laws are such that you have to pay your rent. You can't, not pay rent. I'm assuming that's everywhere. If the landlord's not doing what they're doing, you're still supposed to pay your rent, while they're fixing things. But so they're paying their rent, but roach infestations, and the doors that are broken all the time. And she comes, they come to their place, and they see that, and it looks like somebody's been trying to break into their apartment, so there's scratches all on the locks. And they brought that to the attention of the landlord, and the landlord is pretty much calling them problem tenants because they're different. They're a different couple. So I think there's an issue with them as, tenants. So they keep filing complaints against the landlord, and the landlord keeps filing complaints against them. Not quite sure the details of how this works, but all of a sudden that shows up in, some report that you can get. Like, I don't know what a landlord can file that will show as some type of, altercation or issue with the tenant. I assume that if you pay your rent, then you're in good standing. But evidently, if there are grievances with the landlord against you, that can be filed someplace, and that will show up on a report. So that's the kind of stuff that this person has been saying. They put in requests to fix things, and the landlord, fixes them when they want to, and then they'll file something against them. So I don't know. I never talked to the landlord. I don't know if this is one side of the story, but I see 4 altercations on this report that was pulled up by this tenant. So that was more
you mean
red flag.
the landlord was saying financially the person was not paying the rent, but they were in fact paying the rent?
Financially, the person was paying the rent. So is there something that you can file as a landlord that says that this tenant is a problem tenant? That's what I'm trying.
I don't think so. I mean, you can sue the tenant for various things. I wouldn't think it would show up on the credit report,
Mhm.
if the tenants caused some damage or something like that. But it's a little beyond my experience, though. I
Okay.
don't deal with that side of the law
Well,
that much.
Sandra just brought up another issue that, I guess this podcast has just taken off to another level like it always does. But Sandra brought up the fact about roaches and about upkeep of the property. Now, remember, guys out there, even if you're a landlord, you've got certain duties and obligations that you got to do for your tenants.
Mhm.
So I don't know how that lease was written, but Sam, I think in our leases, the roaches and the bed bugs are the tenants. They got to take care
That's
of that,
correct.
don't
Yeah,
they?
they've
Really?
got pest
And we
control.
just got to take care of everything else. So what the tenant can do is, let's say there's a bunch of things broken in their property, leaks and that kind of thing. They can file what's called a tenant assertion lawsuit on the landlord. But they have to pay their rent into the court system for that actual hearing to be heard. And so that's called a tenant assertion lawsuit.
Mhm.
And the reason why my non-legal self knows about this is because in another world, a charity that I help run called CFH, we actually bought a trailer park where there was a huge tenant assertion lawsuit, and they all paid their rent for like almost a year into the court to a tune of $270,000. And so before the case was actually heard, the property actually transferred from the owner to us, and the tenants actually gave us the money so that we could repair the water, the sewer. There was sewage all over the trailer park. There was water pipes leaking. There was storm management issues. There was flooding going everywhere. So because of that tenant assertion lawsuit, we were able to purchase this property. And so a tenant assertion is a very important thing that these guys can use to beat up their landlord, provided they're not getting treated the right way.
Mhm.
Yeah, let me jump in as the
Yeah.
lawyer here. And as I always try to remind people, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer. Get a lawyer if you need to research these
I
things.
love it.
But the general thing to remember, these rules vary a lot by pretty much completely by location. So in generally speaking, in more conservative places, you can't withhold rent because the landlord has failed to provide something. And more liberal jurisdictions you can. But the way to figure this stuff out is pretty much everywhere there's a tenants rights organization, and there's almost every area publishes, whether through one of those groups or the government themselves, a landlord tenant handbook. Virginia now, I think for certain tenancies, you have to provide a copy of that handbook, and that usually covers a lot of those things. So, from the tenant standpoint, are you not getting the services that you contracted for? Usually, from the landlord's a question of not getting paid, and it can be a little bit complicated. But those books will tend to tell you what'll happen. But the worst thing a tenant can do is just stop paying. The worst thing a landlord can do is try to lock somebody out of their house without checking all of these rules. And this actually leads back to something I was going to chime in about before related to Charlie, is that communication is so important between landlords and tenants, to find the right match, like Sandra's going through now, like Charlie's trying to help out this person. And then once you have it, I learned this from the few rentals I had. Nothing irritated me more than a check didn't show up and I had no idea why. I didn't know what was going on. And from experience with that, I made sure to talk to people at the beginning and said, hey, let's make sure we communicate. If you've got a problem at the property or something's broken, let me know. If you're get into a financial situation, let's talk about it. Let's work it out. And ever since I started doing that, I've never had a problem where it couldn't be resolved fairly quickly. Somebody had, I think, a divorce settlement hadn't come through when they expected. They had some cash flow issues, and I knew about it in advance. And they, back to Charlie's truth thing, we said, okay, well, let's set up this plan. Yes, I can do that. And they executed and everything was fine. Instead, if I would have been thinking about to evict them if they had just, been quiet. So again, all those tenants out there, even if you have your first property, don't assume, gee, I own this. Even your own home. I mean, in DC, if you rent out a room in your home, that is a tenancy, and that person has tenants' rights. And you can't just lock them out in February, saying, well, it's just a room in my house and they broke their contract. So find those rules, read those rules. And landlords, if you're not sure, get a lawyer to handle that case. And tenants, if you're not sure what to do, try to find a tenants' rights organization that's that's objective, that they're not going to just say, unfortunately there's scams like that out there. Some of these groups say, oh, you don't have to pay your mortgage, or because you're a sovereign citizen, or whatever, you don't have to pay your taxes, you don't have to pay. No, that's all not how it works, and the court will tell you that. So find a rational place that says, okay, well, you're gonna have to pay the landlord, but here's your rights, here's what you can ask for, here's the type of letter you send them, and vice versa for the landlord. Here's what you do when they're not paying rent, here's what you're doing if they create a dangerous situation. And so for somebody like Sandra, when she's looking about this renter, it's not too early to sort of know in DC, what do I expect if I've done what Charlie said, I've met the person, got to know them, things seem good, and it turns out they're just terrible. They're a liar, or maybe they were good and they got involved in drugs or family problems. Look ahead, like, what would I have to do to get this person if I've made a bad judgment, to get them out of the property? And unfortunately, like Charlie alluded to, landlords are all that more careful now because of COVID, because you can't just evict somebody easily. DC was like that all the time. Virginia, it's a fairly quick process to evict a bad tenant if they're not reasonable or whatever. Now, though, when you get somebody in there, they may be in the next 6 months, right, Charlie? I mean, even in Virginia, even if they're a terrible tenant.
So we did hire a lawyer and have to evict one of our tenants. And there was a lot of preconceived ideas about why that person wasn't paying. But before we went far past the notice for the lawyer, Charlie said, hey, I'm going to go over there and meet with these people in person, since they won't communicate that freely with us. And that leads us to a second story in the middle class abyss.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
All right. Story number 2. And They both happened this week, man. I just, I'm like, there you go. I just shoot myself. And no, I'm just kidding. I'm of course not going to do that. So we had a tenant that stopped. Well, one of, let's say one of 50 or who knows. All of our rentals through COVID have been going really, really good. But this particular tenant had stopped paying rent in the, March and April timeframe. They went paying full rent to only paying half the rent. And I don't know, the rent's about $1,700 a month. And so they'd been paying every month, but only half month, maybe $1,200, but they've been paying every month. And so I didn't really know them. But of course I know the property. I knew that they were in the property. I didn't know them personally until just this past week.
Wait, did
And
you
so,
not know that they were paying half the rent? I mean,
yeah, we knew. We know. We get late reports all the time.
and you communicated with them about what's going
Yeah,
on?
and they've been
Okay.
communicating with us really, really good.
Okay, good.
And so our person had been doing it because we're not really front line. Our assistant Danica had been communicating with them, and she's been relaying back to us, their problems and what's been going on. And as it turned out, we were thinking that maybe this was a COVID type of problem, but as it turns out, it's not a COVID problem, and I'll get into that story here shortly.
It's
like
got
I
a
said,
little COVID in it, though.
yeah, it's got some COVID in it, but it's part of this same thing that this middle class abyss, this tearing away of the upper class versus the lower middle class, and how the lower middle class, if they have one life event or even in this case two life events, that they're just going to go fall right into the abyss and they're not getting back up. Well, one of the reasons why I went over there was because we actually sent them out a letter for them to be evicted, because technically under the COVID laws, we had reached out to them. We gave them a payment plan. Well, the payment plan is supposed to be pay your rent plus pay back your arrearages. That's part of your payment plan. Well, these guys aren't even paying us their full rent. So we put it out for eviction. They got the letter. And then I'm like, okay, forget it, Danica. Just send me, just get me an appointment. I don't care what day it is. I don't care what night it is. I'm going to meet them Saturday, 3:00, right? Because I said, but all of them that are on the lease have got to be there. I said, and there were 4 people on the lease. I said, if 4 people are on the lease and only 1 or 2 are there, I'm not showing up. I want everybody there because I want to understand what's going on. And oh, by the way, in this case, Danica goes to me, she goes, oh, by the way, one of your tenants owns a house in Dale City, which is close to us. I said, oh, okay. So I put that in the back of my mind. And I did a ton of research just because I'm ready to make a deal when I show up. I'm not going to waste my time.
Not exactly the back of his mind.
Yeah, not exactly the back of my mind, because I'm like, okay,
with a little mask over it.
How can I bring these guys current, or how can we work out a payment plan? So then what I did is I met them, but I made sure that I showed up with my, it's just a basic income statement. And all it is is a list of your income, who's working. I understand who's working because there were 4 people in there on a lease. I had to understand their expenses. So I said, the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to talk to these people and we're going to go through their income statement, because I have to understand what their income is and why they're only paying us half month's rent. Step 1. Well, guess what their income is? Their income combined, $91,000 a month. And they've been paying us a half month's rent.
A year.
Wait, I'm like, what? 91,000?
91,000 a year.
Woo. Okay. That makes a difference. Okay.
91,000 a year. And this could happen at any metropolitan, not only the DMV, but I'm talking all over the country, right? 91,000 a year. And their rent is 1,700. Okay. I'll get into the rest of the story in a second, but I said, okay. So I sat down with them, and remember, this exercise is a lot. There's a lot going on, but number one for me, believe it or not, you guys are going to laugh, I have to understand honesty and I have to understand character. Okay, let's get into the story. Why can't you guys pay? Well, I shouldn't have asked that question, because that then led into 30 minutes of absolute just unbelievable stuff. Number one, so I'm sitting across the table, 2 daughters and a husband. So the 2 girls are sisters, and the husband is married to one of the sisters. Okay. One of the sisters caught COVID, gave it to her dad. He died. They had to pay for a funeral. Number one, funeral. Number two, there were two girls and the husband, but then the other person on the lease happened to have been the one girl's daughter who happened to have had a grandchild to the one girl. It was her grandchild. Well, the baby was born with such a facial deformity that the baby had one eye socket and that the brain wasn't correctly formed, and the baby lasted 4 days. Problem number two. And so between the one problem, paying for the funeral, and the second problem of all that, they just, they just couldn't do it. They couldn't pay the rent. And so they have a combined income of about $91,000. And so what I did is I sat down with
How
them.
much is the rent, Charlie? How much is the rent?
$1,700.
Mhm.
So they had two related events. And so just going over there after looking at their application and doing this and doing that, I didn't know about the other income. I just knew about the one or two. I'm like, oh my gosh, how can these guys even afford to even live in our place? So as I sat down from them face to face, they told me all these stories. But I had an ace in the hole in this particular case, in that I knew the one guy owned a property with his brother over in Dale City. And so that property is probably worth about 470,000, and they owe, like, I don't know, 250,000. So they had $220,000 in equity. And so I just simply said, okay, forget this paying us half month's rent. We're just going to make your life much easier. And so one of my proposals back to him was, I'll put $20,000 second deed of trust on that house. You guys just pay us, let's say 5 years at $475 a month. We'll give you 3 more months of rent for free. You pay us a rent in April. Right? We're now in January when this podcast will probably be published, but it's going to be January. So we'll give you 3 free months of rent. All your arrearages, we'll bring that current. All you have to do is pay us $475 a month for a few months. Then the rent will kick in, and they'll give you guys hopefully enough time to stay on your feet. And so, stay tuned. We haven't really worked it all out yet, but again, it's just another story of how people, just, one or two events happen in their lifestyle, and it just brings them to the ground. It absolutely crashes them. So they're paying back a couple funerals and a couple other things. And again, like I said, their combined income is about $91,000 a year. And so
That
again,
plus, I think that plus the fact that, a lot of people don't see credit as, maybe like we see it now. I mean, we realize that, credit, you won't be able to live, a decent life without, decent credit. So some people don't see it that way. Credit's not something that they value and that they think is so important that I'm going to pay everything. I may eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and ramen noodles for the month, but I'm going to get my bills paid because I don't want to impact my credit. So that kind of goes back to, financial literacy, Charlie. People need to understand that, your credit is, your value, pretty much in this society. So you really, I mean, I'm sure you get to a point where,
yeah, but even take a step back, right? You're so right? And even building your credit is, like you said, it's probably a module in this financial literacy class that now I'm on a damn warpath now. I'm gonna figure out how to buy this. Where are they gonna buy this?
We could do a literacy class just for our tenants alone. We put it out there for tenants, and I guarantee you, Danica could call them and they would attend. We could do a financial literacy class, and they didn't do that.
Yeah, I didn't even think about doing it for our tenants. I think from a community standpoint, I think that's wonderful. I was thinking about hell doing this financial literacy class for the entire country, getting these people, figure this stuff out. Because, like I said, I am seeing this middle class divide happening right in front of our face, and we've been talking about it. Even Sam, we've been talking about it for the last couple of years, but we're actually seeing it with our community. And just getting back to what you said, Sandra, these people don't even realize, well, why do you keep your credit as high as possible? Well, guess what? Because you can get lower interest rates. You can afford more, right? You don't have to pay as much. And your credit will help you maybe buy a house or help you with things. And even getting into this rental, right? So if our homeless lady in story 1 had good credit, she wouldn't be homeless. But because she had bad credit, nobody was willing to take a chance on her in an environment that isn't conducive to any landlords taking a chance on anybody. And so,
Right.
no,
Right.
I just think, man, I'm absolutely saddened to the fact that I'm absolutely saddened to the fact that the middle class people making, I don't know, I'm just making this up, but people making from $60,000 a year to maybe even, let's say 95, and they're living in certain metropolitan areas, how they can barely afford to even live. I said that there's a problem there. And so I'm not the world all end all. I don't know how to solve it, but at least if we can maybe do at least financial literacy step one, I don't even know what step 2, 3, and 4 are, maybe resume building. I don't know what needs to come next, but something needs to happen. And
Well,
if it's happening,
these folks need to be planning from when they're very young on having a reserve of capital for emergent situations, including death and all the normal things that happen in life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they don't have any plans around it. They start off check to check, they stay check to check. They have their expenses as their income escalates. This is opposite of what's like a traditional approach to wealth development.
Right.
no question. And
Because
it's funny.
almost all the wealth is developed by living below your means for a while and then expanding. Maybe
That's the part.
live at your means later on when you're more comfortable.
Most of the stories that I hear, most of the stories that I tell, Sam, are about, when I get someone who comes to me and I have family members, including this person that I'm probably going to rent to. And like I said, family members, they don't remember, when I had to live below my means, they just kind of see you now and realize that, you're there and you have it. And, I don't want to live like that. I want to live like you. It's like, well, you don't remember when I was eating the ramen noodles and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. We have to kind of do that. That's a part of, financial literacy.
Yeah, that's the number one thing.
Well,
is the ramen.
Yeah. Ramen that should be a staple. Ramen and some peanut butter and jelly.
And I have to bring you back to story number 1. And if I didn't do it, I'd be remiss. And this is exactly what you guys are talking about. So we were talking, and this is one of the reasons why I was there for 2 hours. One of the reasons, because I got a big mouth, as Angel would always tell me, and I stayed too long. But
not you,
so she
Charlie.
goes. So story number 1, you guys can remember the homeless lady who's got 3 kids in college and 1 in high school. Well, so we're talking, and she goes, "Yeah, my daughter's," and I'm going to say it, "my daughter's at Virginia State University. She's making straight A's, and she's going to come out of college this year. She's a senior, and she's gonna get a first year salary of probably $40,000 or $50,000." And she looked at me and she goes, "Yeah." She goes, but that's the problem. She shouldn't be coming out making $40,000 or $50,000. If she was ... she should be making $60,000 or $70,000. So she felt bad, and I let her know. I stopped her in her tracks, and I said to her, "Let me tell you something." So we're going to start this conversation right there, because I'm going to go ahead and educate you right now and on the spot, because you've got to understand this so you can tell your daughter, and I'm going to go ahead and meet her if I have to. I said, "Here's what you do. She's going to come out making, let's say it's $40,000 a year. What we're going to help her do, and you can't look at it like it's a job, it's just over broke. That's the way you've been looking all your life, Miss Harris Teeter. You're just over broke. You're making 80 grand a year. Hasn't worked for you. Let me help you out here." I said, "She's making $40,000 a year. Let's enlighten your mind. Here's what we're going to do. She's going to move in with you, make $40,000 a year. We're going to have her living footprint at 20,000. And I get it. There's taxes involved. Let's not get into the bullshit taxes. We're going to have her, and like you said, Sandra, we're going to eat ramen noodles and peanut butter. We are going to have her footprint being her expenses, being $20,000 a year for her first year. We're going to have a savings of the first year of $20,000.
Ramen.
Right. So she's going to save $20,000 a year first year. We're then going to take that $20,000 and we're going to go ahead and invest it at 8%. Now she's going to be making $40,000 a year, plus our investment is going to be making $1,600 a year. Year 2, she just saved herself another $20,000 a year. She's now at $40,000 a year, and she's got a residualized income of $1,600. Now she's at $41,600 of savings. Now let's go put that $20,000 away. Same thing, 8%. Now she's going to have $40,000 in savings, and now she's making $3,200 a year in residual income. Subtract $3,200 from $40,000, honey. You're down to what is that? $36,400, because now your residual income is now making up almost 10% of your income. Oh my God. And how old are you? You are 24 years old. And so do you want to know what happened? And I'll call her Miss Harris Teeter in my story. You want to know what happened with Miss Harris Teeter
What happened?
and my friend Miss Social Worker?
What happened, Charlie?
They both started crying. They were crying their eyes out.
Oh,
And
Charlie.
I'll tell you why. Because they were so happy at the same time that they were sad. They were happy because nobody had ever told them this in their lives. Nobody. And they were so sad because of the fact that their mom, kind of like your situation, Sandra, they all had single moms with no dads around, and that their moms were working 2 or 3 jobs. Just like old Miss Harris Teeter working her butt off. She's an assistant manager, but she's working 60, 70 hours a week trying to raise 4 kids. And remember, they always say presence instead of presence. But when you're working 60 hours a week, 70 hours a week, you can't do the presence because you're working, you're trying to raise a family. And so both of them were just crying. And this was my God, I was just, man, I'm like, I'm enlightening some folks, but man, this was not a fun time. It was
Well, and
absolutely,
it's definitely it's one definite way to build wealth that a lot of people don't know that and I'm doing okay right now, but my oldest son is living with us and saving his money, and he'd love nothing more to go out and rent a place near his work or try to buy a condo or whatever. But when we went over some of the numbers and what he could save and do in a couple of years, like maybe when the market turns down, if it does with the current thing, um, go out and get that first property. It's much better to wait. Nobody wants to say, gee, I'm living with my parents, especially not at that age. But if you're saving up the money. One of my wife's friends, she, same age as I am, age group, she up in Massachusetts lived with her parents until she was 30 and became a vice president of a bank before she went out and bought her first
yeah.
house. And she's got a family, a husband and a family with 3 kids, and is very incredibly financially secure because she might have been more patient than I would have been. But sometimes you have to make those decisions to change that. Unfortunately, there are some people who don't have a parent who has a place to live, and they really are on their own. And if you're lucky enough to come out of school, you may have to spend every dime. But even if you can pay for a room with your cousin or something to keep those expenses down, it certainly makes a lot of sense. It's
Yeah,
not easy, but it can be done.
totally. And so that Ed, thank you for that. I mean, that brings me to another part of the story that I've got to relate to. And again, I mean, this was just an absolute heartbreaking 2 hours. And I'll get into something else that she said, and it's because it sticks to me to this day, just like it was yesterday. She goes to me, she goes, you know what? I did my kids a disservice. I didn't make them work for anything. I didn't make them get a job. I should have made them get a job. The only thing I told them to do was go to school and do good at your books. And that's all you had to focus on. I did my kids a disservice. I looked at her and I said to her, I said, let me tell you something. I said, don't you ever think you did your kids a disservice. I said, you're raising 4 kids doing the best you can, working, a 60-hour week job. I said, the thing that you did for your kids was the best thing you've ever done for your kids. I said, you enabled them to get the gift of education. Now you're going to have at least 3 kids that have graduated from college. You gave them the gift. I said, they might not realize it now. They might get mad at you now because you weren't there for them, you know, presence wise, but you did the best you could and you gave them the gift of education. Now, all we need to do is we need to take that education a little step forward so that they can produce for themselves and they can become self-sufficient. So by giving them that life so that they can focus on education, get into college. I mean, the one girl's making straight A's at Virginia State. I think, golly, I'm impressed. Hell, what else you got to tell me? And so that's part of the whole equation too, is the education piece.
Well, my father always used to say guilt is a wasted emotion, which is
Yeah.
not always true, but in this circumstance it is. For people out there who like that, she feels maybe guilty. I
Yeah.
didn't do X, but I did
Yeah.
Y. As long as you're trying, and if you get a new even this thing with the financial thing, what we're talking about, you learn something. You might be 28 till you learn some of these things, or 32. It's never too late to get started. And feeling bad that you made a mistake before, didn't know something, A, it's probably not even your fault, but B, it's not going to help you to feel bad about it. Just
That's
try
right.
to change it going forward. And I guess that's some of what you guys try to do with spreading the word about how you can develop money through real estate and all that. Ultimately it's nice if you can be on the landlord side.
Yeah.
Right.
If you can start with that, saving that money, and maybe then jump right over renting to buying a little condo, to then maybe renting that out when you go and buy yourself another house, and you start to create real wealth for yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great for us on the landlord side, and we provide a service, and some people should rent. They're moving around, they're not going to be at a place too long. But it's great to be a landlord when things are working out. People are paying, for your property to give you property. So if you can, I guess I shouldn't say it as a landlord, but if you can somehow avoid being a tenant by teaming up with a parent or a cousin or whatever, and then become your own landlord, that's the real, way to financial security.
That's
So I
true.
think we've solved the world's problems
Yeah,
today. I
we
feel good
sure
about
have.
this.
Well, the whole thing on financial literacy is true. I mean, it starts at home, though. I mean, the one thing that
Yeah.
your friends should be doing, all of them, Charlie, is teaching their children that,
Yeah.
you need
But
to be
yeah,
below your means for one. I think we'd all
Yeah,
probably say that's where we started out, right?
yeah.
We
and we
didn't live
probably
beyond
should
our means.
wrap up soon, Charlie. But did you say there was a service that actually does that? Like my kids in Fairfax County, they actually had a class on financial literacy, which was was a start. We had to do a lot more to teach them. But are you aware? Are there public classes people can take for that?
Not that I know of. As a matter of fact, the low income charity that I'm part of, it's actually not a low income charity. It's called a affordable housing charity. Uh, we had these things called the Choices program, and so the Choices was broken down into different modules. There was a healthy eating module. There was a resume building module. There was a build your credit module. There was a financial literacy module. And then there was one other module I can't just take off the top of my head. Oh, a relationship building module, and how to do relationships. And so that's the only thing I know of that's even out there. And so even the other day, my son came to me and said, Dad, you know the thing, and they don't have the classes in Prince William County. He goes, Dad, you know the things that they didn't teach you at school? They should be in the curriculum. Number one, it's financial literacy, financial planning. The other thing that they got to teach classes on is, positive mental attitude, those kinds of things, peer pressure, how to deal with anxiety, all these different kinds of things that aren't out there today, that really are really important, especially for the adolescent. But when I'm talking about financial literacy, is I'm talking about financial literacy classes for adults. I mean, adults that are out there in the working world that are, one incident away from falling into this abyss. And so, I just think for me, one of the things I'm going to do over the holidays, well, this is going to be produced after the holidays, so I sort of gave it away a little bit, but is to go ahead and research these financial literacy, these kinds of classes. Obviously we're smart enough, we can invent the class, no problem. The question is, do we want to reinvent the wheel? And I'm sure there's other charities even in maybe our state and area that have already have this. So we could just probably get it from them. But I just think that that's pretty important.
You put it up on the web for people can
Yeah.
watch it for free, basically, if you put a class like that together.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's should we call this episode "Saving the World" and
Oh
with
yeah.
real estate?
You could call it saving the world with real estate, or too bad to believe.
Or we could call it from living in your car to saving the world. But the last thing I want to say though is for everybody listening out there, we do have an email address that you can send your stuff to. So if you have any ideas or any stories you want us to maybe relay, the email address is yourstory, yourstory at basementtales.com. So just send us an email, yourstory@basementtales.com. Maybe let us know what you think. Got some stories out there that maybe you want us to tell or relay. I mean, we certainly might do it.